Hi everyone, it's Kelly from the Hub. Here today with my dad. We are talking about all fun things wood. Hi Dad, how are you?
Oh, I'm feeling kind of weird today, but that's okay. It's like, why should they be any different, right?
There you go.
So,
There you go.
right.
So remember in our conversation, the sort of the big picture of all of this is that we're bringing art back to the Hub in the best way that we can virtually. And um, Dad agreed to be the first guinea pig, which is totally wonderful. And we were in the middle of his gallery. We showed a lot of different things last time about where you can take wood or where you can let the wood take you. Just sort of this interesting sort of balance. I think a lot of artists try to find their place, whether it's glass or clay or paint or wood even. So Dad's going to continue the gallery and start talking about bowls today, because we talked about, remember last time there were pens and plates, and he loves his little minis, which are one of my favorite things in the whole world as well. And so today we're going to talk about bowls. So Dad, start us off with bowls.
Yeah, well, we talked about lots of different forms, and there's the forms at some point or another start to overlap each other, like what's the difference? How you take a plate and you make it deeper. How deep does it have to get before it's not a plate anymore, before it becomes a bowl? So those distinctions are kind of meaningless to me, but the distinctions that I want to talk about today are the differences between when I make something. You're the one who kind of drew the line between man-made adornments, if you will, and natural adornments, the things that are inherent in the wood. So I want to kind of draw a line, or explore that a little bit while I look at bowls today. So just to, I'm a teacher, remember? So let's review. Uh,
Of
the
course.
first time, one of the first things I showed you was this giant bowl that I made many years ago. I think I said 30, 32 years ago, when it was really only 22 years ago, but hey, I'm old. So
Give or
you got,
take a decade, it's virtually the same.
I was an English teacher, not a math teacher. So
Right.
anyhow, so you start with a bowl like this, and the whole form of bowls can go all the way from, for me, goes all the way from there, all the way to here. So this little devil that you saw the other day, made out of an unknown burl that I collected on the beach of Georgia from driftwood. So everything in between. And just to show you an example of what I mean about, so what's a bowl? So here's a piece that's made from an oak burl, and it's real shallow, as you see, but it has spectacular color and figure and curl and eyes and whatever in it. And the natural rim here is made from a scab that forms on a tree when a limb breaks off or whatever, and it forms this natural protective sort of layer, and it almost always turns dark, turns black. So I found that piece of wood and decided to just go ahead with the natural edge. So is that a bowl? I don't know, maybe. And then here's another one, like under the category of is that a bowl? I found a charred piece of wood. It had been in a fire. It was like a piece of railroad tie almost. It had been in a fire, and I started looking at it, and I discovered that it was cherry. And you know from last time that you know how much I like cherry. So there it is. It's square, and it's burnt on the edge, but it's got a bowl in the middle.
And that's one of those things you would look at a piece of, I mean, that totally looks like a railroad tie or a fence post or,
Yeah,
one of those,
yeah.
like that goes on the burn pile. I mean, unless you said to yourself, I wonder what this would look like on the lathe, that would just go into the burn pile.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I see a piece of wood, my mind always kind of goes to, well, what's inside of there and what kind of wood is it and is it complicated and whatever. So I don't know if that's a bowl or not, but that's one of the forms that I would put in that general category. All right, I want to jump off here with two bowls. Here's the first one, and this one it's a maple bowl, and as you can see on the front, if you were paying attention in the last episode, that's called spalting on the front. And some logs have this spalting that goes all through this spidery pattern like this, but then they also have something like that, where the fungus just followed the grain line right down, straight down through the wood, and it sort of just divides it in half. And I've found several pieces of wood that are one color on this side of the grain line and a whole different color on that side, like that plate I showed you the other day that's divided along the grain line. This is a maple bowl and it's got a walnut rim. So I wanted to make it nicer, so I added the rim. Rims just kind of beg out to be decorated or to be have something contrasty on them. Like this, one of the older bowls in my collection that I've never offered for sale. It's quite dark, even though it's a maple. It's gotten dark over the years, and it has a fancier sort of a walnut rim. It's a little bit flared, and there's a little bit of a shoulder detail right there on the edge, but just a nice old form. So when you talk about bowls, you can almost make them any shape you want, deep,
Right.
shallow.
And this is also one of those things that we had talked about in the first episode. Bowl doesn't necessarily mean it can hold water or hold any liquid. Bowl means that it's got a shape that resembles a bowl, because I mean there are practical lathers and there are artistic lathers, and I think the answer is yes for lots of people. They can go on that spectrum. And so it doesn't have to necessarily, you don't have to use it for salad, or you don't have to use it for anything except for the beauty of what the wood is. So I think there's probably some people who are like, bowl? How in H could that be a bowl? But you're right. Yeah.
Oh, in fact, one of the first times I ever did a gallery show, I took some of my stuff to a gallery. And I had an appointment with the gallery director, and he was known for having his nose up a bit in the air. And he looked at my stuff and he said, well, I don't really think I want to show any of your things in the gallery. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, I just have a thing that things that are utilitarian forms but aren't really utilitarian, I don't think that's art. And I went like, okay. So if I showed him something that was not shaped like a bowl or a plate or a vase, I don't know quite what that would be, although I do have a couple of those things that I'll show you at the very end.
But I mean, that's such a fascinating take on, and we've talked about that. You've gone to craft shows, like things that people would call a craft show, and people think that you are way above what other people are showing. And then you've gone to gallery shows and people are like, this isn't art. And so it's this funky place that you try to find yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then here's another bowl with a shallow, different shape. But this is a maple bowl also and a walnut rim also, but just a little different from that other one that was a little more spherical. All right. So, like I told you the other day, when you make something like this, so I turn this out round and I get it down to the shape that I want, and then I cut a round piece of walnut on the bandsaw and glue it on top, and then start to turn it again. And so now it's one piece of wood. I shape it however I want. A little bit different than what I did with the plates. It's still called layup to me, where you're gluing several pieces together, a couple pieces together. but it's done, this I do in the round on the lathe, and it's a little bit different. But I wanted to show you, I had somebody look at this one time and tell me, where did you find a piece of wood that looked like that?
Oh, yeah.
Where did you find a piece of wood that looked like that? And I kind of like had to stifle a little bit of laughter. And I said, well, that's not just one piece of wood. All the dark parts are walnut and the light parts are maple. And the person was like scratching their head, and they just didn't get it, how that happens. So what I wanted to show you is how that happens. You have to make this. So I make these ahead of time. So this is some curly maple with walnut sandwiched in between, cut in 8 pieces, which is easy to do on the table saw. And you just glue them in between. When I turn around, that front side is sanded. When you turn around the back side, you can see the glue in there, whatever. So you just make it up this far, right to there. You make it that far. And you glue this on top. And then you turn it out until you get to kind of the shape you want. And then you take the piece that you cut off and you glue that back on the top. So, and all what's in the middle, of course, doesn't matter because that's going to be hollow, right? Hollow. So the middle gets cut out. So the only thing you see is the edges.
What's hard for some people, and I'm one of them, is that I can't create 3-dimensionally like that. And so if you have a hard time conceptualizing it, I can understand that person. I mean, not that it's one piece of wood,
yeah.
But I can understand like, I'm not quite sure how to make that. You have to be able to not only know what it looks like, know what it's going to look like, but know how to get to that spot. And that's just, that's not a skill that I'm really good at, that you are excellent at.
Yeah, you have to have that 3-dimensional spatial perception thing going pretty good in order to make things like this. I mean, you can make plates which are pretty much flat and add complicated things to them if you want to, or whatever. But when you start thinking in more in 3 dimensions, you got to be able to do that.
Yeah,
so,
I think that for people like me, it would take a lot more trial and error, which equals a lot more error, in order to make it, in order to make all the parts click in your head to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm a self-taught person, so I didn't understand this right away. It took me a long time to get to the point. But
right, and that's one of those things that, like, right, anybody can, if you want to learn, you will.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out where your comfort zone is and then see if you're willing to push yourself past that.
Yeah, you do trial and error stuff, and some of it works and some of it doesn't, and you keep working on the stuff that works. And I'm not shy at all about stealing ideas from other people. So, once in a while, a wood turner will put something on Facebook or whatever, and I'll look at that design and go, it's like, I can do that. Oh, that's how they did it. Sometimes I look at it and I say, how did they do that? And even as, I'm pretty good at that, but I still can't always figure it out. And then, I try it myself. It's a little story about this that people, I think, find interesting. I showed this at a show, and a person came up and said, that looks like an piece of American Indian pottery. I said, really? I said, they said, where'd you get the idea? And I said, I don't know. It just came to me. Well, that conversation stuck with me, and I went home and started looking around, and I picked up a National Geographic magazine that was about 5 years old that was still laying on the coffee table. And the cover was American Indian pottery. And I opened the article, and 2 or 3 pages in the article, there's a picture of this pot, exactly the same. And I had no idea. I'd seen it. I always had a good visual memory. I'm a bit of a photographer as well. I always had a real good visual memory, better than anything else. I mean, I can't remember my phone number, but apparently this thing, I saw it in the National Geographic, the shape, and it stuck with me. And 5 years later, I made it and didn't know where I got the idea. So that's one of the things that makes, I guess if you want to call me an artist, you said, he doesn't believe he's an artist, but that's one of the things that makes artists different from other people, is that they have that kind of memory, and that design process sometimes baffles even the person who's the benefactor of it. I have a couple of other pieces that I'll show you maybe next episode that apparently I designed in my sleep. So I'll tell you that story later.
Well, and I think what else is really special is that you have the ability to make wood glow. You're a very good finisher. And I think that if you put, and everybody has skills or whatever, but I think you are really good at that. And so that I think that everybody can see when you put it on that plinth that those pieces glow. And so to have her say that it looks like pottery, I mean, what a cool comparison. That it has the same, that you can take wood and make it look like clay. In that,
that's the miracle. Yeah, the miracle of Dutch oil and paste wax and a little elbow grease.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm done showing you bowls that I made with where I added stuff to the bowl to make it, a rim that was different and whatever. This is, I think, the oldest piece that I have in the house. It's never been offered for sale. Another piece of cherry that I really like, a pretty little bowl. And the reason I showed you this is because this is the first time that I remember where I took a natural feature of the wood and allowed it to stay in instead of taking it out. Can you see?
Yeah, there's like a notch.
In case you can't.
Yeah.
There's a little notch in the edge. And there was a little folded sort of a crack in the edge of the piece as I was making it. And I kept making it smaller and smaller and smaller. It was probably 2 or 3 times that big when I first started with it. And I started making it smaller and smaller. And I said, I got to keep going smaller until I get that crack out of there. And then I stopped and kind of scratched my head and I said, no, I don't. I'm just going to clean it out. And there may have been a little piece of bark or something in there. I'm just going to clean it out and leave it there. And somebody will look at that and say, why'd you leave that crack in the edge? And I'll say, well, because it was there. It's sort of like, why did Edmund Hillary climb Mount Everest? Because it was there. So it's very thin. It tapers to almost nothing out here at the edge. But I thought that crack right there that you can see, it helped to define the piece because I didn't want it to look like pottery again, even though, glazed pottery, that's
right.
I didn't want it to look like it was perfect. I wanted it to show its character. So that's kind of where I started, pretty small, leaving natural features in the wood. And you go from there to here to a bowl that I cut out of a log and I left bark on. And I took the surface off the bark, but I didn't take the whole bark off. This is a natural, called an inclusion in the wood, where the bark actually grows inside the tree. There's more of them up here, kind of plain around that side. But then it has a natural bark rim. So this is the bark on the outside of the tree. If you can imagine, the tree is just standing like this, and that's it. all, the bark all the way around the way it was on the tree. So what I'm going to do now is talk to you more about those kinds of bowls that have natural features rather than man-made features. And a good example for contrast is this one. So here's a cute little bowl made out of a piece of cherry, I think. No, this is from an apple tree. It's from a crab apple tree. And I like turning apple because it's real hard. And it has these differences in color very often. So I made one like this that has all these natural features. These are worm trails just under the bark. So there used to be bark right there. And I just barely, can you see it?
Yeah.
I just barely took the bark off and left the worm trails there. And the reason it's light over on this side is because almost all species of wood have light colored wood right under the bark. That's called the sapwood. And the reason it's dark over here is that they have dark colored wood in the middle, and that's called the heartwood. So almost all species are like that. So you can use that feature to let the pot decorate itself as you make it. But then I got kind of bored with making stuff like that. So I made one like this. This is mulberry, which turns kind of yellow after it sits around a little bit. And what I decided was it had a bunch of little knots in it where the limbs had grown in the log. So I decided I would take each one of those little centers of knots and plug it with a piece of plastic. So I had these little pieces of PVC plastic that I'd saved for who knows what reason. So every place there was a little limb and a little center, and then sometimes around the edges, I plugged it with a little piece of plastic, just drilled a hole and glued it in there, like I showed you the other day of that plate that had the plugs.
Which is fascinating because that's simultaneously what the wood is and how you added something to make it, in this case, better. And and I've seen that piece in real life, and what's fascinating about it is when you run your finger over what those PVC bits, you think it's white wood. And I said, what the hell is this stuff? I was like, where did you find wood this color? And he's like, oh, it's PVC. I was like, of course it is. Of course it is.
I don't consider it finished adequately until that happens. When I'm running it on the lathe, I sand it a little, and then I run my finger over, close my eyes and run my finger over it. And if I can feel it, then it's not done. I have to sand it some more and get it so you can't feel it.
Right.
So here you got these two bowls.
That's what's so cool. Yeah,
they're almost the same size and shape, different kinds of wood and whatever. One of them has all natural adornments, and the other one is full of natural adornments because it's got all these.
Right, they got this giant crack on the side. Yeah.
But then I added the man-made stuff as well. So, all right, I'm going to run through just a couple other forms. Walnut bowl.
Yeah, walnut really is just beautiful.
Notice the shape. And it's got the wood turns a little bit lighter over here on this side than it does on the other side. And it's pretty shallow, but an unusual shape. And I've made several pieces with this same shape where they're like this, and they come to an edge, and then they go like this to the rim. And you can do that shape, that contour, in a bunch of different, you can make a deep bowl, a shallow bowl, or whatever. This is very plain. It's got nice grain inside. The walnut grain is pretty nice, but it's really very plain, just unadorned altogether. Here's one where it's another shallow bowl where the decoration is almost all in the wood. But I just noticed this now. I didn't notice this before. Look.
Yeah.
Another little open crack in the edge that I just sanded off a little bit to leave it there to make sure you know it's wood.
It's interesting. I mean, as we're talking about this, I I'm thinking about like your evolution, about how you really weren't sure in the beginning when you had those sort of abnormalities if you were going to keep it or
Yeah,
not. And I think that it's interesting
right.
that as you progressed, you were like, look, about two-thirds
Yeah,
of
and a
this is
lot
a
of
big
people,
chunk. It's okay.
and,
And that
and
you,
there are a whole lot of people who don't get that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I've seen and I've hung out with some wood turners who feel that if the piece isn't can't be used practically, that it just isn't correct. And so they use a
yeah,
lot of like epoxy to fill. I mean, they love the beauty of the wood, but they would never keep a hole in it because then you wouldn't be able to use it. So they use a lot of like epoxy.
right.
And I say epoxy, but it's that clear stuff, whatever
Yeah,
that's called.
yeah, epoxy,
Oh,
epoxy.
okay.
Yeah,
And so it's just interesting to like explore how that transformation was for you. That's neat.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then again, another plain, unadorned piece made out of a piece of cherry that you can see the sapwood, which is just under the bark, all the way around the rim and draping down the sides, and then the darker heartwood. Nothing adorned about this whatsoever except the colors of the wood and the natural bark rim.
And
So,
right, you created all like its own lip just because you know how trees work.
yeah, sort of. If I kept turning and made it smaller, all this light colored heartwood would have disappeared.
Right.
Then it's all the same color and it's too boring now.
Right, which is fine, but you wanted to show all the parts of it. Yeah.
Right. Another piece of spalted maple with all kinds of stuff going on. The reason I showed you this one is different than the other ones in that this came from a hollow tree. So that's where the hollow was. That's the inside of the hollow tree. You can see the curvature. So the hollow part of the tree was like this.
Yeah.
And I cut a chunk out of it. And you see what I think I said in the last episode, that maple especially gets like this. And once the tree is injured or it becomes hollow or whatever, the wood oxidizes so that it turns this dark nut brown on the inside where it was exposed to the air. And then the rest of the wood is still light, except these places where the fungus got in and spalted it and made all these lines and stuff, and a couple little wormholes here. But that's again the idea of you find a piece of wood that has something to show off, and then you make the piece so that it shows it off, you know.
Right,
So,
which like in a lot of things, those are super easy words to say, but then when in the moment when you got your tools and the lathe is going 10,000 majillion RPMs, you're like, whoops, I'm not sure if this is what the wood
right,
was. And also some of that comes out in the finish. Sometimes you can't necessarily tell the level of the beauty until you're done sanding it.
right.
So
Well, actually,
you have to be sort of like predictive about what could happen.
until you put a little oil on it, when you can be like almost white like this,
Yeah.
and you put oil on it, all of a sudden the stuff all jumps out because that's what the oil does. Interesting you said that. It made me remember something that I was going to say to you. In the last episode, you were talking about using a Dremel or using a router to make the pieces. And I said to you that the way I do it is easier than doing that. But that's not really the answer. The answer here to that idea about using a power tool is that a pottery wheel and a lathe are the two tools that artists use where the tool is not spinning, the material is spinning, and the tool is stationary. So if you're building a cabinet, you use a circular saw and the blade is spinning. If you want to ease off an edge, like you said, make a square edge into a slightly rounded edge, use a router. The material is stationary and the tool is spinning. If you want to use a Dremel for some kind to polish something, to carve something, any of the multiple things that a Dremel can do, the material, you hold it in your hand, it's stationary and the tool is spinning. But that's not the way it is with a pottery wheel or a lathe. When I make something, I hold the tool stationary and the material is spinning. So that takes away the need for using a tool like a Dremel or a router or a saw or anything, because the material is doing the spinning, not the tool.
I never thought about it like that. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
And another thing that this makes it kind of weird with wood turning is that other kinds of art, like, so let's say painting. How do you make a painting? You take a canvas that's empty and you add something to it to make a painting.
Right.
Well, how about sculpture? You take a block and you subtract stuff from it to make the sculpture. That's what turning is. And you take a block of wood and you subtract things, you take things out. So I got a bowl like this. This bowl is like, 8 inches wide and 5 or 6 inches deep. There was a mountain of wood shavings that came out of the inside of this bowl. And that all gets sent to the compost pile.
Yeah.
It ends up in a pile on the floor.
Right.
Because when you turn, you subtract stuff. Pottery is that interesting medium where you can do both. You can add clay, and then you can subtract by hollowing it out, taking parts off, because it's a plastic medium. It's a plastic medium.
I bet there are many sculptors who are like, I wish I could do both. Because, how many times have we thought, and you've done the same thing. Like in sculpting, especially when you see something absolutely gorgeous.
Right.
When they were doing the hands and that finger was out, that finger could have come off in a slickety split. And that's the difference between, how that sort of works. And just like when you're doing these intricately and super thin and funky little pieces, especially on those minis, you can, a mini could go up into sawdust in a half of an eye blink.
Right. And you've heard the story about that somebody walks up to this old man sitting and chipping away at a piece of wood, and he has a beautiful elephant that he's carved out of the wood. And somebody said, how do you do that? And he said, well, it's very simple. I just take this piece of wood and I carve away everything that doesn't look like an elephant.
Right.
Well.
Right.
Simple. I took a big block of wood and I carved away everything that didn't look like this.
Right.
Simple. I had an idea in my mind of what it was supposed to look like, and I carved away everything else that didn't look like that.
Yeah.
So, your father's a smart ass from way back.
Well, but you know what? I think that too, when you look at how sculpting is, how you can create something beautiful out of marble is very similar to how you can create something beautiful out of wood, that you would take both of those medium and go, well, good luck with that, because look, it's just a tree that fell down that has ants all running through it. Or it's a piece of ground. And then you can, because you have talent, you can create something out of it. And that's the fascinating.
Right. Okay. I think I'll show you a couple more things, and then maybe we'll stop for today and go on to other stuff the next day.
Beautiful.
I always liked chunky forms. So here's a ball that isn't very big, 8 inches, bark on that side, nicely spalted, all kinds of stuff going on in there.
It's
real chunky.
Right. There's
So,
nothing delicate about that bowl at all.
one delicate thing about this bowl.
Right.
So sometimes, you feel like making something that's, here's a good contrast. Look at this bowl, which tapers to nothing on the edge.
Yeah.
And this thing, which is never less than an inch thick, really chunky. So I like chunky forms. I wish I had another one to show you. I just sold one to a friend who likes chunky forms too. So this is a perfectly clean design where there's nothing on the rim or whatever, just a little decoration in the wood. But then once in a while you find a piece of wood like this. So this is another chunky form, but look at the rim. I think what happened is that this face was split, maybe on a wood splitter. I don't know. And so it's not naturally that way, but
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because it looks like the surface of the moon to me. But you're right. It looks like it broke rather than came that way.
Yeah.
Like stress there was stress on it.
Yeah, when I see something like that, I think of that as sort of mountainous terrain.
Yeah.
There's a geography to this. It has a surface that looks like a mountain range or the surface of Mars or the surface of the moon or whatever, because it goes up and down. It's not symmetrical.
And even the sides sort of wave. It's not even just
wavy.
The sides wave in and out. Yeah.
And there's all this texture going on. In fact, there's some little bird's eyes almost wavy stuff going on in there. And that comes through out here as well, and all this sort of waviness that's in the grain. So, I like those chunky forms as well. All right. A whole different category of bowls.
Okay, there are viewers who are like, there's a different category of bowls.
Well, separate category within the subcategory within the category within the category.
Right. Who knew we could just talk about bowls?
So if you take a log like this and you put it on the lathe this way so that it's spinning like that, you hollow it out, guess what happens to the rim? The rim is high on this side, low on that side, and high on this side, low on that side. Because that sort of looks like a saddle that you sit in, that form is called a saddle bowl. So here's a miniature saddle bowl made out of a piece of apple wood. And that is the bark edge of the wood. So this is the center of the tree, the dark part right there. That's the center of the tree. Or it might have been a limb, I'm not sure.
It's turned on its axis in a way you wouldn't think.
Right. Yeah, because it's turned, instead of being turned, whatever.
Right.
I can't even quite have my mind around it.
Right, right.
But there you go. So when you use the natural curvature of the log, it makes the rim rise up on two sides and drop down on two sides. So that's called a saddle bowl because it looks like a saddle.
Yeah.
Pommel in front and whatever you call the back in the back and your whatever, saddle bowl. I made lots and lots of these in different sizes. And here's one that's kind of in the middle that I like because it's so dramatic. It's a saddle bowl. It's got a really, really deep curvature because it was a sort of a small log. And you notice, look at the end of the tree. Wow. The center of the tree has a starburst in it.
Huh.
and then it goes down on the side again. Then on the other side, you look at the center of the tree and it's got the starburst in it again. And this is actual bark. The bark stayed on this. I don't remember, somewhere a long time ago, I learned from somebody who knows more than me, which is a whole lot of people, about if you cut a tree in the wintertime when the sap is all down in the roots, you cut that tree in the wintertime and put it in your garage, the bark will stay on. If you cut the same tree in the summertime when the bark is full of sap and put it in your garage and let it dry, the bark will all fall off. And it has, you can sort of imagine that if the tree is swelled up with sap, and
Yeah.
then when it dries, it shrinks,
Finished. Yeah.
then the bark is going to fall off. So there you go. This apparently was cut in the wintertime. The bark stayed on. Sometimes you start to turn a saddle bow and the bark flies off. So you just either do something else or you go ahead and do it anyhow and let it be what it is. But that's real dramatic. I always like this because it's such a dramatic shape, and it's hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah. You
Like
have
you
to really
said,
go like, wait,
because,
how is it the middle of the tree? And you have to like put your,
yeah.
like there's an old
So-
Friends episode for those of you who are, you know, what you used to watch Friends. You have to like be like Joey. You have to be in the map. So you have to like be in the tree and go, all right, how do I go on the lathe if I am the tree? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how do you get turned? Yeah.
So you can tell that this plinth is round. So imagine that's a tree going like this. Well, that's the way the bowl is oriented in the tree.
Yeah.
And the reason it goes down like this is when you hollow out the middle, it goes down around the edge.
Yep.
You can't see what it did, but you get the idea.
Yep.
It goes, like so. So I always like that one, even though it's not especially a spectacular piece. I love the fact that it's got the starburst in the center of the tree and the fact that the sides go down so drastically. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
There's a beetle that infests a number of different species, maple predominantly. I think this is boxwood, but I wouldn't swear to it. It's called the ambrosia beetle. And it goes into the tree, and I'm told by people who know these things that the urine that it leaves behind causes as it moves through and makes little holes, causes the tree wood to turn color. And in maple, the color is mostly brown, but in boxwood or buckeye, the color, for whatever reason having to do with the chemistry of the wood, the color turns pink.
So
Or
cool.
reddish brown.
Right. And
so
like
this is a saddle bowl.
pea. It's pea in a tree.
This is beetle pea.
Beetle
This is
pea.
a beetle pea buckeye. So
It's
this
so
is
cool.
an especially interesting piece of wood because it's also spalted. You can see here and there some dark lines, like down here around this little pocket, or up here along this, you see some spalting lines from the fungus that got into the tree as well. So this tree was a mess. It had beetles and fungus and who knows what else. And here's the little holes that the beetles leave when they go in, or they make when they go into the tree. And you can always tell ambrosia beetles because there's always two holes right side by side. See the two little holes? Two holes right side by side. And I don't know whether that means they go in the one hole and then they turn around and come back out, and instead of going out the same hole, they make a second hole. I don't know why. But ambrosia infested logs always have those two little holes. Sometimes there's three. But I really like this piece. It's very dramatic because of all the crazy stuff going on in the wood. And I didn't do anything to this except open it up, clean it up, shape it, finish it, whatever. I didn't add any color. I didn't add any adornment. I didn't add anything. All this is right inside the tree. So I said to you in the episode before that there are things hidden inside. I said my goal is to show off the beauty that's hidden inside trees.
Yeah.
And there's things inside trees that you wouldn't even imagine. Well, beetle pea.
Who would have thought?
Fungus.
Right.
Fungus. All kinds of stuff. And where the bark used to be, bark didn't stay on, but the underneath part is dark, is still dark. So there you go. So that's the last bowl to show you today, completely unadorned by anyone except Mother Nature. And all I did was open it up. So
I mean, I gotta say, I think that any way you watch this, whether you watch this as an artist, whether you watch this as a craftsperson, whether you watch this as a person who has no preconceived notions, it's fascinating. If you watch this as a scientist, it's fascinating, because who would have thought anything that you could do anything? And let's restate one other point. 98% of the wood that Dad uses is after a storm on the side of the road or in someone's yard that he helps cut down and then takes it home. And very rarely, and you always talk about it, very rarely, is there a piece of driftwood, but that's still found wood, or like exotics, but those are, those, you actually purchased those, right? You can like purchase some exotics, or did you get, how
yes.
did you get those? Yeah, okay. Right, so some of those things like zebra wood or whatever, they're not natural to the United States or whatever, so you have to have a source for those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've got a shelf in the basement that's full of exotic scraps, and I got a box full from a woodworker was going. It's possible that the guy died, and there was a garage sale, and they sold off his tools and stuff. And I got there too late for all the good stuff, but I bought a milk crate full of scraps of exotic wood, including rosewood, zebra wood, purple heart, cocobolo, zicote, all kinds of stuff. And then I bought a few boards at a store called Woodcraft that caters to wood craftsmen. So I bought a few pieces there. The other thing is that that we travel a lot. I told you the other day about picking up wood all over the place. I bought some wood in Oregon that's only grows up there. It's a kind of maple that's very light colored, but it's all spiky under the bark, and it's all full of eyes. It's very unusual stuff, and it only grows I think it's called big leaf maple. I'm not sure. Very unusual. One of my cousins gave me some pieces of mesquite from Arizona when we were visiting them in Tucson. I picked up pieces of mesquite outside of Zion National Park. I picked up pieces of redwood alongside the road in the forest up in Northern California. I told you I brought moose antler home from Maine. I've got, you have to let me step away for just a second, as long as you're saying. I'll be right back.
All right. And I think that's one of the neatest things is that, talk about, this is the original recycling. Even if,
exactly.
even if Dad didn't have, a box of exotics, or even if he didn't travel a lot and pick up some, interesting things that are not found in Northeast Ohio, the stuff you can make out of a windblown maple is still just as gorgeous. And that's amazing.
Yeah, and except for all that stuff that I described,
yeah,
everything that I've showed you, except for some of those adorned pieces, Everything is made out of trees that grow here in Ohio. Walnut, maple, cherry, crabapple, peach, plum, oak. Okay, I want you to guess. Guess time, and then this is it
Oh,
for
I'm
today.
terrible at the guessing.
So,
Wow. I mean, what's cool is that it's ginormously reflective. I mean, I just, and I've commented several times about finish work. I mean, it's clear that there is funk going on. So because we talked about that beetle, it looks like it could be beetle. But that tree has such cool ring work that I don't know. I mean, there are a few trees that have ring work like that. That tree
well,
must be old.
I think it's Douglas fir,
Huh.
which doesn't grow around here. Do you know where I got it?
Uh-uh.
This is a telephone pole. For real, a telephone pole. And that's the center of the tree.
Right. Huh.
So it would have been like this in the tree.
Right.
And that's the reason it's yellow is because telephone poles are soaked in creosote or that stuff that makes, they call it womanized lumber that you make decks out of and stuff.
Right. So it doesn't burn, so it doesn't rot, so it's not,
So,
it doesn't like succumb to the elements. That's the point
Yeah.
of a telephone pole.
so it makes it kind of yellow. I wore a double mask when I was turning this because I wasn't quite sure I should be inhaling any dust from it. And there's that's moose antler on the top.
Huh.
That's not why I wanted to show you. You talk about reclaiming and recycling telephone pole.
Right. And there is
Sorry, I'm hopelessly addicted.
right. I mean
What can I
just,
say?
and just like that piece of like, stuff that looked like it was a, burnt railroad tie. There's 90% of human beings would have been like, yep. And who looks at a telephone pole and says, I think there's probably something pretty in there, because it's just such a mundane, everyday, throwaway kind of a thing that you never think that there could be a way to create. And I mean, I don't know, how many times do I need to say it? That's why it's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I know guys that adorn their pieces with either little rods or little rings of copper from a copper pot,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that stuff's gorgeous.
brass,
Yeah.
aluminum, silver. I saw a guy made a miniature this big around that was all studded with little silver plugs that he probably got from a jeweler somewhere. And it's like, anything, bone, ivory. You shouldn't do ivory, but there's still old ivory around that you had an old broken ivory statue, you could make a little ivory thing and make something out of that. Bone and antler of all different kinds. I've got some caribou antler that I've never quite figured out how to use it because it's a weird shape, but one of these days I'll use it for something. And I picked it up in Oregon in the caribou preserve. So, whatever, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Whatever you can. And there are tools made out of carbide that doesn't, that's almost impossible to sharpen, but when it's sharp, you can cut steel with it. So you could put a steel plug in a bowl or something like that and cut it with a carbide tip.
So cool.
And I have some of that. So, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that, that is what, I mean, I hope that there are people who are watching this and going, wow, so what if and then their mind just goes about how could they create something that's like yours but different, and that's called art. I mean, that's
Right.
the whole point of this. That's the whole
Right.
point.
Right.
It's truly fascinating. Thanks, Dad, as always. It was wonderful to hang out with you again.
Okay, thanks. It was fun. And next time we'll do the last part of the gallery, which shows all the more wonderful things that nature can do with the wood and I just open them. All I got to do is open them up and show them off.
That's right.
And then more surprises after that.
And we love surprises. Thanks, everybody. See you.
See ya. Bye.